Reconstructing the Lives of Our Female Irish Ancestors. We're happy to have Stephanie O'Connell, who's a certified genealogist with us today. She's a professional genealogist who's passionate about incorporating social and women's history into family narratives. She's lived in the UK, so she has expertise in English, Scottish, and Irish records. Stephanie is also a faculty member at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy and a mentor at ProGen, and has also presented lectures for Legacy Family Tree, Celtic Connections, and many genealogical societies across the country. So I'll turn the time over to you, Stephanie. We'll take questions at the last 10 minutes. So people who are in the chat, if you will type your answers there, we'll make sure that Stephanie gets them.
Great, thank you. So welcome to Reconstructing the Lives of Our Female Irish Ancestors. Here's a few friendly reminders with regards to photos. There are a few slides which I've indicated you are welcome to take a photo of, and you'll see that with you'll be able to tell that by a camera in the bottom right-hand corner. So you're likely attending this session because you've heard or experienced firsthand the unique challenges of Irish research. With female Irish ancestors, the task can be even more daunting. In our time here today, we'll review the 5 W's and H relating to Irish research, with the focus of the importance of including women in the historical narrative. And we'll bring theory into practice with a case study to illustrate the application of these methodologies and share some creative research strategies. Challenges often encountered when researching female ancestors is that historically women's lives were often less documented than their male counterparts. Once married women not only lost their identity and surname, but any property she may have brought into the marriage was merged with that of her husband. Women had fewer legal rights. They were often less educated. And in some cases, they may have gone by a middle name or a nickname. You may also encounter Latin names in Catholic parish registries. Now, further complicating our research is the loss of records as a result of the catastrophic fire in the Four Courts building in Dublin, June 1922. 7 centuries of Ireland's historical and genealogical records were destroyed, dating back to the 13th century. So on the left, you'll see a list of some of the more significant records lost in the fire. And on the right are records that were either intentionally destroyed or never created. The main takeaway is that aside from a small amount of fragments, there are no Irish censuses until 1901. Meaning there are limited records for those who lived during the time of the Great Famine, causing their stories to often go untold. But we mustn't despair. As author Jennifer Newby suggests, utilizing creative research strategies can help us discover more about the women in our female lines. So let's take a look at some of these methodologies. So genealogical research methodologies are foundational to building accurate and comprehensive family histories. They serve as a framework for conducting thorough research and accurate genealogical research and summaries. So these are some common strategies when researching women, and you'll see these utilized in the case study today. And I like to think of methodologies as like tools in our toolbox. You often have to reach for more than one to accomplish the job. But one tool that's often overlooked is history or historical research. It mainly relies on firsthand information sources for the time period of our research subject. It's vitally important when engaging research of another country to understand different cultures and societies, what we would consider historical context. Understanding events and time periods allows us to view our research subjects and the records we locate for them through the political, economic, social, and cultural setting at the time they occurred. Now, there's long been a debate about women's history and where it fits in, or if it's a separate discipline altogether. But what's most important is that we seek sources specific to women's history because it offers a distinct perspective of the past. By focusing on sources specific to women, we can uncover stories that offer a more complete and nuanced understanding of their lives. And it's important because this genealogical standard 12 informs us to consider these factors when planning our research, as they could affect our plan and scope. Now, while I've called this a tip, it is in fact crucial that we acquire as much information for our immigrant ancestors in US records before heading into Irish research and Irish records. So let's start by looking at a case study. I've titled it The Life Story of Irish-Born Elizabeth Jones. So starting with what we know was one of the methodologies we looked at earlier, and it's really intuitive, right? We often are using this without even realizing it. So this is my grandmother, Ruth Bevan Gould. She died in 2011, 1 month before her 102nd birthday. Now, I was very close to my grandmother, and while she had many secrets, her love of New Canaan, Connecticut was not one of those. My grandmother spoke affectionately of this town that her mother grew up in after immigrating from England as a young girl. Ruth is buried in New Canaan at Lakeview Cemetery in the same plot as her parents, Walter and Elizabeth Jones Gould, whose headstone is pictured here. And I also knew that Bevan is a family name. Although my grandmother didn't know where it originated, she was pleased it had been carried on in her descendants. My research began with the corner pieces of the genealogy puzzle, census records. With just a name and state of residence, you can often make connections across generations using these records. The Jones family was enumerated in the 1900 census in New Canaan, residing on Summer Street, which is about a 5-minute walk to the Lakeview Cemetery. If we zoom in and take a closer look, we see Robert Jones as the head of the household, a shoemaker born in England, and his wife, Elizabeth, was born in Ireland, which was new information for me. Their first daughter, also Elizabeth, was born in England prior to immigrating to the United States. Now, while the remaining 6 sons in the census were born in Connecticut. Also in the household was Robert's brother. He too was a shoemaker. So here we're immediately seeing these generational connections, and I can start to build or put them in, assemble a family tree, right? And so information from one census record, and you'll notice that I have some purple clouds here that I've noted some observations for mining the census for as much information as possible. I've noted, the immigration dates and noted gaps in time where perhaps another child was born. And I form a research question. Who were the parents of Elizabeth Jones, wife of shoemaker Robert, born about 1856 in Ireland? Now, just in the beginning slides, I'm going to refer to Elizabeth, my research subject, as Irish-born Elizabeth because her daughter is English-born Elizabeth. So here's the death record for Irish-born Elizabeth in 1906. Now, most of this information, aligns with the information in the 1900 census, but it also provides additional information. Significantly, the father's name of Frank Bevans. The record also indicates she was born at St. Mary's, which was a Catholic cemetery in Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, the informant was her daughter, Mrs. W.F. Gould. So we need to keep that in mind because information related to Elizabeth's birth, including her father's name of Frank Bevans, was likely told to her daughter. She didn't experience this information firsthand. So she's not a primary source, basically. So I reviewed the vital record index for New Canaan. It lists the birth and deaths of Robert and Elizabeth's sons that we saw in the census who were born in Connecticut. Now, even in the index, Elizabeth's surname was recorded as everything from Bepaw, Bevan, and Brown. We're starting to see a pattern here. We're getting close. Now, at the time, their firstborn son in Connecticut was born in 1884. New Canaan recorded births in a registry. And here's a transcription of his birth, which recorded his mother as Lizzie Bevan. So Lizzie, likely a nickname, and Bevan. And while Bevan is spelled A-N, I'm I'm able to recognize this family name connection. His mother's birthplace is listed as Dublin, Ireland, which, if correct, is a huge clue, right? How lucky am I? But we need to make sure that this is, we need to verify this information. It also recorded that Joseph was the fifth child born to Elizabeth, and only two were living. So this confirms my suspicion that some children had not lived to adulthood. Now, for the sake of our time today, I'm not going to look at all of the remaining sons' transcriptions of birth, but this was the only one, in fact, that specified Dublin. The rest just simply said Ireland. Now, the death certificate for English-born Elizabeth recorded she was born in Manchester, England, and again included her mother's maiden name of Bevan, birthplace Ireland. So timelines are an invaluable tool in genealogical research. I hope you're all using them. They offer a structured way to organize events. They aid in our analysis and correlate information that you find in various records. And they're great at highlighting gaps and that may spark ideas for future research. So you can see here at the bottom, I've highlighted that I need to obtain English-born Elizabeth Jones' birth record. But what records may be available between her 1879 birth and 1882 or 83 when the family immigrated to the United States? The 1881 Census of England. So the family should have been enumerated, perhaps in Manchester. Now, despite the transcription of son Joseph recording his mother was from Dublin, I'm going to stick with a similar strategy. I'm going to look in the census of England before jumping into Irish records. Again, trying to find as much information as I can about the family and confirm identities. So whether online or in person, we're going to research in England. So I was able to obtain the Manchester birth registry for Elizabeth Jones. The information regarding her father's name, his occupation of shoemaker, is in alignment with the previous information I found and provides support of Elizabeth's maiden name of Bevan. Yes, that was from a civil registry, sorry. So despite Jones being one of the most popular surnames in the world, Robert's occupation of shoemaker aided in the search of the family in the 1881 census. Taking a closer look, we see Robert Jones as the head of household. His wife, Elizabeth, worked as a slipper binder at the time. But the most amazing find is that Mary Ann Bevan, widow and mother-in-law of Robert, was enumerated in the household, as well as Francis Bevan, who was recorded as Robert's brother-in-law. So once again, census records to the rescue for these generational connections. And this allows us to do something called cluster research. The concept of this method is that evidence needed for our research subjects will rarely be found in searching only the records of our research subjects. I said that correctly. Comprehensive and successful projects almost always require us to broaden our scope. The Jones family immigrated to the United States in 1882 and 83. So while they would not be found in 1891 England's census, perhaps Mary Ann or Francis Bevan would be. Now, no enumeration for Mary Ann was found. However, Elizabeth's brother, Francis, was enumerated with his wife, Annie. And the census reported that both Francis and Annie were born in Ireland, but son John was born in Lancashire, England. Now, John's age of 19 suggests that he perhaps is a son from Annie's first marriage. So I looked for their marriage registry for Francis and Annie, or she was recorded as Anne, and they were married in 1886 at St. Mary's in Liverpool. Anne had previously been married, and while it's a bit challenging to decipher, the highlighted yellow box here, you can see that it says Michael Devon, but it's very close to Bevan, and it says he was deceased. So for reference, here's what I've sort of been able to put together. My research set, okay, sorry about that. my research subject, Elizabeth Bevan Jones. I've been able to add her mother, her brother Francis, and since I'm feeling pretty confident about her father being Michael Bevan, but in for my purposes, I've included him with a dotted line just to say that I'm not 100% confident. Okay, so finally, with information from records in the US and in England, we can finally feel comfortable moving into research in Ireland. So it's important to become familiar with the Irish jurisdictions. Starting at the top, these are the smallest to largest. And Loganham and Townland.ie are a great resource. They're a name database, place name database, and they're a great resource. It's also important to familiarize yourself or be able to quickly reference laws of the time period of your research subject, right? So these are some that are specific to women during the time that Elizabeth and Mary Ann were alive in Ireland. Now, irishgenealogy.ie is a free website. It's created by the Department of Culture and Heritage and does a nice job of describing where records are located. So knowing that civil registration began in 1864, prior to when I believe Elizabeth Bevan was born, my records I'm going to be mainly looking at are going to be births or baptisms and marriage registries in church records, right? And the starting dates vary by location and denominations. There we go. So a search for Elizabeth Bevan, born about 1855, returned these results. Now, what's kind of fun about irishgenealogy.e, I included, you can search with an additional name. You can see here, I included Michael. This is sometimes helpful, but it can also limit results. So certainly try it both ways. So the index provided only her mother's given name, no maiden name, but also included a sponsor name of Margaret Monks. It's a little bit of lag here, I think. Sorry about that. So sorry. Let's see. And so knowing, my point is that the image is just not, this is an index, but the image is not digitized here at irishgenealogy.e. However, knowing the parish name makes it very easy to go to the next slide, National Library of Ireland, to the Catholic parish registers. This is also free to do. And since I know I'm searching St. Andrews, I just go ahead and enter the parish name, but they also have a great interactive map that you can click on. And remember to search, nearby parishes sometimes if you're struggling to find your ancestors. It's always important to broaden the geographical lines up there. So you can see that it also provides a diocese name and the variant forms of the parish name, which are important to note because early in my research, St. Andrews is often referred to as Westland Row. And so it's important to make note of all of those variations. So here's the entry, the image of the entry for Elizabeth Bevan. Oh, that's right. That screen. What are you seeing? Where's the light? Oh, that's right. Can't see. Okay, so sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so here's the image of the entry for Elizabeth Bevan. We can see that Michael and Mary Ann are her parents, and her sponsor was Margaret Monks. It's very hard to read, I understand. But in this example, the information in the registry and the image is exactly like the index, but we all know that it's important to view the original record because often there can be some kind of notation in the actual image that we certainly want to know. Let's see. So with Find My Past, it's a little more streamlined. This is a paid subscription, but it will take you, once you do a search, it will take you, there's a button you can directly link you to the image. And they have a lot of options for advanced searches. Here I search with the father's name of Michael and only the surname of Bevan. Obviously, I click the boxes for variance with a 5-year range. And we see a number of records. And in fact, these were all the children of Michael and Marianne Bevan. Of course, I want to look at all of these records, right? Because not just for my research subject, but because over the years, as an example, while Elizabeth's baptism gave very basic information, by the time her younger brother George was baptized, there's quite a bit more information in the registries, the baptism registries, and we can see that this one, George's registry, provides information about Marianne's maiden name, right? So Marianne Monks, huge information for us to capture, and their place of residence of 5 Fitzwilliam Lane. Francis and Marianne Monks, likely sponsors, are likely relatives, right, of Marianne's, probably. And so in continuing to search more than just records for Elizabeth and Marianne, I continued to search her brother George and the rest of the Bevan family. And I came across an entry located in the Civil Death Registry Index for the youngest son, George, in 1867. That's the image there on the left. And while the image is not digitized actually at irishgenealogy.ie or Find My Past, I was able to obtain it from the General Registry Office. And while it didn't record his father's name, it says he was the son of a smith. And his death occurred at 19 Upper Exchange Street. Present at his death was the Margaret Cassidy. So it's interesting to know, right? Is not his mother isn't present at the death. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Oh shoot, sorry. I think the top one is blurry. I apologize. So after the point is after civil registration in 1864, you can typically find 2 records. You can find the church record and then the civil record for birth and marriages. So make sure you check both. And so up top, we have the Catholic Parish Registry for Elizabeth Bevan's marriage in 1876. And while I think it is blurry, it provides her address, both the address of the bride and the groom, and their parents' names and residences. So for Elizabeth, which is kind of hard to see, but I'll just tell you that her parents' address was 10 Blessington Place, but here there's a notation that I mentioned before that her father was dead. Now in the civil record below, it provides additional information like Elizabeth's occupation of servant and her father's occupation of coachmaker, but it did not note that he was deceased. So that's why it's always important to check both sets of records, or all sets of records you can locate. So I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like I have been able to answer my research question. Elizabeth Bevan Jones was born on or shortly before her baptism, 5 January 1855 in Dublin, to Marianne Monks and Michael Bevan. But as genealogical standard 73 instructs, genealogies, pedigrees, lineages, and most other genealogical writing include descriptive, biographical, and narrative information besides any vital statistics. This is quite possibly why the standard is one of my favorite, because this is a favorite area for me to research. It requires us to identify our research subjects uniquely within the context of their historical era. And this is our call to action, right? That we must challenge the male-centered view of history and write fearless and amazing Irish women back into the history they did so much to change. So context unique to Marianne and Elizabeth, we look at the political landscape, major events, religious conditions, personal experiences. And the diagram illustrates these may overlap, right? The political landscape falls certainly deals, especially in Ireland, right? And these are things we need to recognize. The political landscape certainly has a lot to do with the religious landscape. So now I use a number of formats to record my research findings, but as I'm a very visual person, I do often diagram, whether it's on a dry erase board or in some kind of software. I find that process, helps me visualize and see patterns. And so from the baptisms of the Bevan children, Marianne and Elizabeth lived at Fitzwilliam Lane for at least 7 years. And I wanted to learn more about this area so that I can write more of their story about Elizabeth's upbringing and childhood. So the 1895 map, the circle is Marion Square, one of Dublin's grandest Georgian squares. The great Catholic liberator Daniel O'Connell actually had a home here. Now, my ancestors lived on the back lane of that fancy square, Fitzwilliam Lane. Now, while I've been fortunate enough to walk here, we don't always have the opportunity to do so. So online sources can be a great resource, such as Google Maps. So this image right here is where about 5 Fitzwilliam Lane would have been located. Today, it's a car park. But as I explored the lane using the map, I traveled a little further down the road and I came across this home, which looked closer to the time period of my ancestors. Google indicated it was a historic building and a 4-star hotel called Marion Mews. I found the hotel is run by the Irish Landmark Trust and is one of the most significant survivals. I don't know, sorry. Is one of the most significant survivals of an 18th century Dublin townhouse. The Irish Landmark Trust is a nonprofit organization whose mission it is to conserve historic buildings and turn them into holiday accommodations. So to do this kind of work, they must have the history of the homes in the area. So I contacted them, and as you had a little preview a minute ago, I received this lovely response from Caroline Crowley in which she explained the layout of the grand homes. That they faced a formal square. She mentioned that they faced a smart road, which was a new term for me. And she also included a 4-page history, which provided an enormous amount of detail, and a few photos pertaining to when they were built, the restoration process, and materials used, and specifically mentioned Fitzwilliam Lane. So the 1901 Census of Ireland is the earliest complete census to survive Public Records Office explosion. While the Bevan family was not enumerated, right, they had already immigrated to the United States, reviewing the house and building form, the census provided insight into Elizabeth's home life. So we can see that 7 families lived at 5 Fitzwilliam Lane. A total of 23 people occupied 8 rooms. So four people to a room. Zooming in, we can see the particulars of the household, or of the house, the structure. So the walls were of stone, brick, or concrete. The roof was slate, iron, or tile. There were 7 windows in the front of the house. So just some just additional details to give me about what their home was like. Now, despite my ancestors not being recorded in Dublin directories, Fitzwilliam Lane was recorded. And so I can look that up and see that, during the time in 1858, my ancestors did live there. Some of those on Fitzwilliam Lane were tenements. And again, into the future, they were the same. Now, if you look closely, this is a side note, but you might notice just down here, Richard Griffith was just a few lines down, and he's the Griffith's valuation land surveyor. So I always find that funny. But to learn more about tenements, I started researching books, right? So this is a book about tenement life from social historian and professor Kevin Kearns. It's based on interviews and oral histories of Dublin men and women. And he explains that only through oral history method can we reliably capture life experiences of tenement folk. And that would go for oral histories of any kind, right? It's the only way to get a firsthand account in a lot of situations. So the book includes accounts like this one from Mary Doolan, detailing the conditions of tenement living. Now, I'm a fan of podcasts and recorded talks, and like this one from 2016, in which Effie O'Connor spoke about records of children in the 19th century Ireland. Now, this was a summer talk series sponsored by the National Library of Ireland with the Irish Family History Research Center. And you can find the recording is actually still there. There's actually a number of great talks, so I recommend you go and look and see what else there. Effie has a great one on criminal records as well. So correlating information from records and of the Bevans residence, in this case, in this particular case, I was looking at Fitzwilliam Lane. So I've taken the information from records and historical context learned by researching the area. and been able to, I can start to assemble and create a narrative unique to Elizabeth's childhood, right? So I'm reconstructing and documenting her life story. And the information, things like playing a game of cat and stick and marbles in the street. And so it's a combination of the context sources I referenced. Another of Kevin's books, Dublin's Lost Heroine, sparked an idea for my research. Reading accounts like Chrissy Hawkins describing how the men carried their daughter to Glasnevin Cemetery to be buried, and others who resided on Whitefriar and Cork Street, which were nearly a 3-mile walk to Glasnevin. It occurred to me that the distance may not have precluded my ancestors from doing the same. Now, I had looked very briefly at cemetery records for Michael and George Bevan, and admittedly, I had gotten overwhelmed. There are many cemeteries in and around Dublin, as you can see by this map here, and I wasn't clear about the religious traditions and if there were any residual influences from penal laws. So a search of names in area of Dublin on historic graves or find a grave or billion grave did not prove fruitful, so I quickly moved on. I also had a bit of a bias. As Glasnevin Cemetery contains historically notable monuments and graves of some of Ireland's most prominent national figures, like Daniel O'Connell and Charles Stewart Parnell and Michael Collins. And I couldn't imagine my ancestors were buried here. But it is the largest cemetery in Ireland, and it was first to allow Catholic burial services. What's more, since the first interment in 1828, the staff have recorded and preserved the details of all of those buried there. These burial registers have been preserved and digitized and transcribed on their website. And both Michael and George Bevan are buried there. Now, it's not free. You have to buy credits. But to see the full registers, you can search for free and then to see the full registers. But I was glad to do so. Michael Bevan was buried 1 February 1862. He was 35 years old and lived at 5 Fitzwilliam Lane. This is all the information I have to date for his death. I'm not sure how it occurred, but this is at least I knew when and where. But of course, I didn't just stop with purchasing the record. Glasnevin Cemetery actually has a resident genealogist who informed me that, so I sent her an email. She informed me that the family paid for Michael's burial and were given a right to buy the grave, although they did not take up this right. So this means that others in his grave are not related to him and there's no marker. She also informed me that the family did not pay for George Bevan's burial in 1867, likely because they had no money, which may explain why George's residence is listed as the SD Union, otherwise known as the South Dublin Union Workhouse. So the Irish Workhouse has been described as the most dreaded institution ever established in Ireland. And this would have been an absolute last resort for Marianne and her family. So Find My Past has digitized the Dublin Workhouse admission and discharge registers. They have some additional registries as well, and it's always important to check with the local libraries of the area you're searching in too. Not all of them have been digitized. So for nearly a decade, you can see by my search here just for Elizabeth, that for nearly a decade, the family were inmates of the Dublin workhouses. This is one entry for Marianne and her 3 sons, Michael, John, Francis, in 1865. In addition to the inmates' names, their age, religion was recorded, as well as their previous occupation. They're poor. Yeah, yep, and homeless. Yep, and eat, yep. They're supposed to go as families, but yeah. No. Yep, just for the poor. It was their poor law. So upon entry, inmates were bathed and given a gray woolen uniform, which included a shawl for women. They next proceeded to the main building where families were separated. Now, as George was an infant, he was likely stayed with his mother, while her daughter, Elizabeth, would have been sent to the girls' quarters, and the boys would have gone to the boys' section. Workhouse food was very monotonous and basic, a diet of watery soups with few protein, led to an alarmingly high scrofula incidence among young inmates in years after. I was able to find, using a number of different sources, I was able to find the layout. There was sort of a general layout that most workhouses followed, and Elizabeth would have spent her time between school and work, which consisted of mending clothes and spinning wool. And while she did receive education in the workhouse, it was rigid. She would have received industrial training and religious instruction, but it was definitely considered a pauper's education. Okay. So one entry for Elizabeth recorded that she was a servant, right? We had seen that, and we'd also seen that before on her marriage registry. So again, returning to books, I was able to, Mona Hearn's book, Below Stairs, examines areas of life which had previously not been reflected in Irish literature or social history. It's again based on interviews, but also government reports, royal commissions, family papers, and diaries. Now, the book on the right, Women Surviving, has various chapters, some that cover workhouses, Irish female paupers, life of domestic servants in Dublin. Okay. And as with Elizabeth, I can begin to craft, unique biographical information that allows me to, to again piece together parts of her life story. And you can see that, I was able to bring in parts of the domestic service, and even, look into about how employment advertisements often specified that the applicant needed to be single, of good character, steady and active, and may request the applicant be Protestant. So these are some of the sources I consulted to get the daily details of the Irish workhouses. JSTOR has 12 million journal articles, books, images, and I believe, at least with my account, I can get 100 free articles within 30 days. You can also access these from libraries. If you have students who are in your family, they can often have access to these libraries as well. These are, again, I'm a fan of podcasts. These are just some of my favorite. The Irish History podcast, I was just listening to on my way here today. And what I love about that podcast is it's very time specific. So it's not like you have to start at one session and listen all the way through. You can sort of pick and choose the ones that you're interested in, which I usually do when I'm researching certain locations. I'll move around to those. But I also find that PhD thesis papers are a great resource. And you can either Google those, you can often find those on HathiTrust, or sometimes on JSTOR as well. Now, I save newspapers for the end, but they are certainly a valuable resource. I managed to find Mary Ann Bevan in one article in 1864. After the death of her husband, she was working, and this was prior to entering the workhouse. She was arrested for stealing a frock or dress. She was sentenced to Grange Gorman Female Prison. Now, while this was obviously an awful time for her and the family, the prison registry, which is below here, is a treasure for my research. It offers the sole description of her physical appearance. So using my fundamental AI skills, I put this information into ChatGPT. And it generated this image, which is likely the closest I will get to an actual photograph of my 3 times great-grandmother, Mary Ann Monks Bevan. So in closing, I want to say that researching our female Irish ancestors is not just an academic exercise. It's a way to ensure that their contributions are acknowledged and celebrated. Thank you for attending this presentation, and remember to give feedback in the app. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So questions. So should I open the chat? Okay.
They have questions, stop the share. And then if they have questions,
Say them back. Okay. So now, can you help me open? Where's the chat now? While we're waiting, does anybody have any questions here? If I can you hear me? Good. Oh. Yeah. I really just put, okay, thanks. I just put in, I think I gave the time period in addition to, but then I just put in what the registry said, which I believe was she was 5'4", brown hair, fair complexion. And then I added the things about like, she, you know, Irish, 18, you know, that the time period of that. And that's what it, yeah. I'm sure if I did it 4 or 5 times, I might get 4 or 5 different looking images. So take that for what, but I took the first one. I went with it. So yes, sorry, one more. Oh, so the question was, which is the best resource for Irish newspapers? And I would say Find My Past, for sure. It's mostly in one location. I find it's the user friendly. So I would definitely start there. But I will say, I think it's in it should be in my syllabus, but the National Library of Ireland website has, you know, pages of information on where to find additional resources. So. All right, I'm going to try to read some of these. Okay. Fine. I'm sorry. Actually, I don't know off the top of my head, but I mean, oh, easy. Yeah, sure. Certainly 1850s. Sorry, the question was about newspaper dates, how far they go back. Yeah, they go back to, I mean, I would say certainly late 1700s. I'm not sure I've looked much before then, but okay. So one of the questions is, what can you do when there are so many women with the same name? For instance, I have a great grandmother whose name was Mary Scanlon McCall, who married John McCall. There are so many Marys out there and Johns. Yes, for sure. So I have a bunch of Marys and Johns as well. I think that, you know, again, my suggestion would be to look in records, all kinds of records, for their family, other family members, sort of like I did in the cluster research. It's hard to know which time period you're talking about, but there certainly could be a reference in the records of their other family members. And then you can also, I mean, you're also going to have to get a time where you have candidates and you're going to have to research them, sort of like we have to do a DNA sometimes with those people that have, you know, you're not a strong match with. You have to just build trees, research trees, and in a process of elimination. So there's kind of 2 ways to go about it. One trying to find them in records, or any hint in records. And one thing I did find briefly, like with Marianne, when if you notice in that prison registry, she said her street was that she was born on. So it's interesting. It's not where she was when she was arrested, and you have to be careful to read that, but she was born on Herbert Street. So when you look at registries of any kind, prison, the workhouse registries, anything, make sure that you read those top paragraphs, you know, so you know what the column means. Is it the address of where they were born? Was it the address where they currently lived? Was it their parents' address? You have to be clear about that. But it's a large process, but a problem we all have and face. Let me see. So, I don't know. Let's see the question. Okay. Where do I begin to look for a great grandmother, Mary Callahan, who died in Chester County, I think she means Pennsylvania, and was married to Dennis Hurley? All I have is a name and year of death. So I would do, you know, I would look in as many records. She tells me the time period here. She didn't. But again, you're going to want to look in marriage records, death records, all in the United States. You're going to want to look in Mary's Callahan's siblings. You're going to try to create a cluster for her. You're going to community, right? You're going to try to see who were the sponsors in her marriage, in her children's baptisms. You're going to want to try to find people living with the same maiden name, with the same married name and census records, you're going to just pay in 3 to 5 pages before she's enumerated, or just try to build her community. And then look in all of their baptism, birth, marriage records, whatever's available at the time period that you're researching. You're going to start by making a community for her, and you're going to try to find commonality of name, place, location, things like that. How do you know which parish? So I find out information in County Cork. How do you know which parish? Since I don't have that information, I didn't find what I needed. So I'm a little unclear what that means, but the websites I mentioned earlier, so townlands.ie and loganum.ie are great ways to, you can, put in streets, you can put in townlands, you can put in different things, and they will pull up the barony, they'll pull up a list of them. So I'd start there looking for that. If we're talking Catholic, if you believe the religion is Catholic, like I mentioned on the Catholic registers at the National Library, there are maps, interactive maps, and I would click on those and look in the surrounding parishes. And I would always reach out to the county library, the nearby libraries. They have great information and are very helpful. Indentured servant records and contracts. So I know they exist. I would look on Find My Past. I've used them briefly. I've just searched them. I haven't really utilized them very much, but I do know that Brian Donovan spoke on this, I think yesterday. I don't know if it was recorded, but there were I've sat through it a little bit, and he talked a lot about Find My Past. So I would start looking there. And again, I think, like I mentioned, I think that Find My Past has a very advanced options for searching. I think that's very helpful. See, I've traced my family in the U.S. whose father marriage record is dated 1866. Where and how do you recommend I proceed to continue? So again, this is a question regarding William McDermott. He has a marriage record for them of 1866, and so again, I think kind of the same thing. It's about building a community. You have to figure out who is in their records, who signs deeds, any record you can find anybody else's names. They were never alone. They were always in a community. And so you're trying to find similarities in location, in name, in age, anything. And then from there, you're going to have to research those people out. Like they become, even though they're a collateral ancestor or a community, you're going to have to research them with the intent and same strategy as you would for a primary research subject. And you're hoping to gain any piece of common, information, whether that's location or surnames of other people. So there's a good place to start with Church of Ireland records for the early 19th century. I would start at irishgenealogy.ie or Find My Past. I don't know exactly where you're talking about, but those are where I would start, not knowing exactly what area you're looking at. Let's see, where am I on time? Let's see. Okay, please forgive my forgetting Irish history, but would the Four Courts fire have destroyed records for the entire island of Ireland? Were Northern records there too? So no, they were not. They were. Some records were saved. They were, depending on the location, right? So it's really about the records that were stored at the Four Courts building in June of 1922. That's why parish records survive, right? Because they were not stored at the Four Court building. So that's, you can Google that information to see. I don't know exactly what area you're talking about, but you can look up to see I think on Find My Past or any of the ones I've mentioned, they'll have a list of the records that are available for the time period and for the location. There's specific books that cover Cork County. There are, I don't have them off the top of my head, but again, I would look at if you Google Cork County historical or genealogical research, I think there's a genealogical society there, historical research society there, and they would have some good information. I would also try the National Library of Ireland and local libraries there too, certainly. I'm just trying to make sure. missed anybody else. Is there any other questions here? Are we good? Let's see. One question, where would I look to find my ancestors in the 1820s immigration from Cork to England? So I would you're only going to find them in U.S. records, right? They didn't record leaving Ireland. From Cork to England. Sorry. That's not going to be recorded. So because people migrated seasonally between England and Ireland. And as an example, Robert Jones in the case study, his father was a shoemaker. They are in Ireland and England, and they moved back and forth quite a bit. So it's more about finding them. I would look in English records and finding them there, to start, because there's just more records in England available. And this is what I did with Marianne too, right? I found them in the 1881 census. I knew they had to have come from Ireland at one point. I thought they maybe were married in England, but I did my searching there and didn't find it. So then when I went to, began searching for them in Ireland, I found their marriage record there. So I'd start in England first, and then I would look for records, but there is not going to be something that recorded their actual migration. And I think that's typically called a migration, but let's see. So were you done? Am I come? Oh, 9 minutes. Okay, good. All right. So my Irish ancestors seem to have originated in various parts of England. No trace of them appears before 1800 in Ireland. Oh, sorry. Was there some kind of immigration project in England that sent Protestants to Ireland around that time? Yes, there was. There's actually a few. They called them schemes. They're not schemes like we think of them as schemes, but they were projects. And so certainly there were. I think the best thing to do is to I'm blanking on the name of that particular one. There was another one from Ireland to Canada about that time period, maybe 1820s. I think that the National Library or National Archives of Ireland probably has a lot of that information. But they're pretty easy to find. You can kind of find those immigration projects. Even if you Googled immigration projects or schemes from Ireland, you would be able to find that. So what software do you use when you are doing the charts to sift through the information you've gathered? Great question. So I do use a genealogy software just to record stuff, but when I'm analyzing and correlating information, that I got to be honest, it doesn't do me any good because I'm such a visual person. So I use Lucid Charts. The charts you saw here are in Lucid Charts. I use that. It's also really great for DNA, but I use stickies on a door because I can move them around, but I also use a whiteboard. I'll write it out and I just see it I have to see it a bunch of different ways. And actually, like I mentioned, the process of it just helps me think and prompts some sort of different analyzation part of my brain or correlation. See, would it make sense that my 2 times great grandmother would have been baptized as an infant in 1850 in Ireland, then again 10 years later in England? Yes, it does make sense. Especially because of the religious and political landscape of the time. If there was any, if they had or there was in the community any sort of negative association with being a certain religion, and also if you wanted to get married, and I don't know the answer to this question, but say she wanted to get married in an English Church of England, church record, that might have been a requirement. So it is possible for sure. I found them baptized twice sometimes in England. I can't explain that either, but nothing surprises me there. My Irish ancestors seem to have originated in various parts of England. No trace of them appears before 1800 in Ireland. Was there? Oh, I already answered that. I'm sorry. Make sure I got all these. My Irish ancestors were Protestants who lived in Ulster and immigrated to America in the 1700s. How many of these sources and strategies would apply to researching them? So I think it's the same strategy, right? It's different time period, but I would say it's, well, first of all, Protestant records are different, obviously, but there's a lot of information on John Grenham, which is irishancestors.com, like about sort of the different, again, schemes and time periods, and leaving from Ulster is a little bit unique, but unique to that process, but there's a lot of information on it. The strategies would remain exactly the same. You might have a little easier of a time. I would think that the records are, they're depending on when there were when there was time or what time period you're talking about, there may be more records available. Again, it goes back to where they were held, if they were destroyed and things like that. But you would use the same researching strategy, right? You're going to try to find, build a community, find their friends, associate, and neighbors, and sort of piece together their community, and then look in those records as well. I have one more question here too. Yeah. I think it's spelled the same way, to be honest. It's just not a negative term. I mean, I don't, maybe it's not a negative term at all. It's just it just means that there were programs for immigration, right? So they call them schemes. When they like to Australia, to New Zealand, things like that, they had various schemes. They had them even from in Dublin too. They were trying to, help people leave the workhouse. That was kind of a scheme in that time period where they didn't want you just staying in the workhouse forever. So they would try to get funding together to send certain young people to United States, to send them to, those kind of things. And right. And those sometimes, yeah. That makes sense. And anyone else? Sorry. How many days, here's a good, easy question, quick and easy. How many days after birth were Catholic babies baptized? Typically, it varied a little bit on the time, but usually the same day. But I think it's maybe the day after. But there's actually a lot of really interesting information about that process that you can find online in some of the sources I mentioned. But yeah, usually it's the day of. So often the baptism and birth date is the same. So, well, thank you all very much. It was fun to present. It's one of my favorite topics. So thanks for sitting through this.